So tonight, I want to talk about something that's not precisely in our Parsha this week, but it's certainly on our minds. CBST has a long history with children. I want to say a few words about children at CBST for some obvious reasons. CBST was founded, unlike most non-Orthodox synagogues in America, not to educate the children of the members. And so many synagogues, especially in post-war Jewish life, many synagogues in the suburbs, for instance, were founded by young families who had moved to the suburbs, who had young children and wanted to create Jewish community. And those children grew up in those communities, and I know so many of you, I'm certainly a product of a synagogue like that, and I know so many of you are as well. But CBST was founded by adults for adults. In 1973, when the first group of people came together to have a service in which they could be openly gay and deeply Jewish at the same time, it didn't occur to them in a thousand years that there would be children one day in such a community. So CBST was started for adults, by adults, and as a result, it didn't suffer from the problem that some other American synagogues suffered from, which is what many of us have come to call pediatric Judaism. A Judaism that's geared to kids, but really there's not a lot there for adults. CBST kind of was the other way around. We had a synagogue that was geared exclusively for adults. And so when it was time for the world to change enough that LGBT families started having children, things had to change at CBST. When I first came to CBST, in 1992, the only children at CBST pretty much were children who had been born in heterosexual relationships, either of families at CBST or people who had children before they came out. There were only a very few who were born inside of an already LGBT family. Of course, technology and laws and the possibilities of adoption, etc., changed, so that really we saw what we call the baby boom, the gay baby boom, and CBST started to have kids. Some of you remember a drash I gave many years ago on a Rosh Hashanah calling on CBST to start training and schooling and education for kids. And that was a little controversial then, but we have come a very, very, very long way. Now, many, if not most, of our members don't have our own children, either legally or biologically. But there's a concept in Judaism that's deeper than one's own children. There's a famous thing in the Talmud that says, don't say banayach, don't say your child or your children, say bonayach, your builders. It's a very famous story about something else, but the point gets made that if one does not have one's own child, either legally or biologically, if you teach children, or if you contribute to the teaching of children, or you contribute to the institutions that teach children, those children are as if they were your own. There is a deep concept that it's not about one's own child, it's about a communal responsibility. So I like to think about the bonayach part of that verse, that all of us are contributing to these builders, to these people who will be the builders of our future by creating a Jewish LGBT community in which children can emerge knowing that their families, however quirky they are part of a community which loves and respects them. This past week, we have seen erupt in a fashion that unfortunately we've become a little bit beaten down to accept, which is ugly and mean and threatening, which is the question about the opening of schools come this September. One might think this should be a question that science should help us figure out, and a society would dedicate the necessary funds to make it happen. But no, we're in a society now led by a reckless, narcissistic person who thinks only of his own political power, and a Secretary of Education who is dedicated to the dismantling of public education. And so we see this pandemic being used by this president to take another step at a major institution of this country of public education. And it was public education that made the difference for the Jewish community to move from being an immigrant community, poor and illiterate in English and often with no college education or even high school education. It was public education that moved our community into the middle class. And it is public education which makes it now possible for those who are in the same position our community was to move into the middle class. But obviously, public education is not just an economic issue, but it is for sure an economic engine. But we're living in a society in which the idea that we would, in the middle of a pandemic, not dedicate as much money as it would take to make sure all of our children and all of our teachers are safe is something we need to continue to be outraged about and to fight against. So this week, for those of you who weren't paying attention to any of the news this week, let me remind you that what happened was this question about reopening the schools. Now, let me remind all of us that we had my wife, Randy Weingarten, do a town hall back in June where she discussed a plan that the AFT developed in April, which outlined every issue that needed to get resolved and the funding that would be necessary to do it if we had the commitment to the children of our country. That was in April. We discussed it at CBST in June. And now the world is erupting as if it's a surprise that September is coming. And we need to find a way to respond to the millions and millions and millions of school children in our country who need to be in school. We are in a pandemic and in a moment in history, maybe unlike anything, for sure, anything any of us have seen in our lifetimes. Nothing quite like this has happened. I've talked before how important it is for people to be writing. History will want to know what it was like to be alive now. And one of the things that we are facing is how can we open schools safely for teachers, for students, and for parents. And this issue affects all of us, whether or not we have children. Some of you know this profound issue is rooted in a way that our country doesn't respect or honor teachers the way teachers should be honored and respected. And I'm so proud of my wife and the work that Randy does. I'm so proud of the many teachers at CBST who day in and day out have spent their careers doing the most noble profession there is, which is to help young people learn to think, to develop their artistic skills, to appreciate the world and learn how to be a thoughtful, engaged human being. So I want to honor all those teachers at CBST and tell you I'm with you in this struggle to figure out how you will go back and be a teacher again. That is what you want to do. I want to say to all the parents at CBST, I'm not sure there's anything as difficult as what the parents did for these last 3.5, 4 months of trying to work and have kids at school, at home who are trying to be at school and to try all not to kill each other. I want to honor all the parents who have been struggling through this pandemic with the burden and the responsibility of taking care of young people in the middle of all of this. We have to face what's coming in September together as a community and as a world. Some of you know that Nancy Pelosi has introduced to the House the HEROES Act, which is the fourth bill to provide money to help in this pandemic. The first 3 bills did not help states or local governments at all. And you know that a state government has to have a balanced budget. That means if we don't get federal funding to help, the only way to get a balanced budget is to cut and cut and cut and cut spending. And in a place like New York City, and in all cities across this country, the primary things that will get cut is personnel. We will have to cut sanitation workers. We will have to cut police. We will have to cut fire. We will have to cut all municipal workers, including teachers. We will have to see a city that could go back to what New York was like in the 70s, and many of us remember that very, very well. So the HEROES Act, which is the fourth of these big spending bills, and we've seen how important some of those have been, is now being debated in the Senate, and we must have the Senate pass the HEROES Act. Please. I've never done this actually in a Friday night sermon, is to talk about how important it is to call your senators. We have senators who are fantastic here in New York State. Call them, thank them, tell them we really need the HEROES Act to pass. Pay attention, watch the news about the HEROES Act. Get those of you who live in other states, make sure you know where your senators stand on this bill. Contact them by email, by phone, send them letters. Thank you, Sabrina Farber and Calls and Cards and Resistance, for making this part of our work as a synagogue. But most of all, thank you to the parents and to the teachers for taking care of the young people in all of our lives. Thank you to the teachers who are doing it day in and day out. Let's get the funding necessary to face a world. This year, school will not be like anything we've known before. It's going to require so much on the part of parents and of teachers. And those of us who are neither need to be first responders and support for every parent and every teacher we know and love. So in the comments right now, thank a parent, thank a teacher if you're neither of those. And if you're one of those, thank the other. And I'd like to end tonight by offering a video that one of our members, Sharon Golub, who is a music teacher in a New York City public school, did with her fifth graders to end their year, a year which was ended in the middle of this pandemic, to create some music, some love, some hope, to inspire us all, to continue building and fighting for a world that these fifth graders can grow up into and thank us for when they are our age.